Mino Gizekut, good afternoon, bonjour à tous. I am Laura Demers, TD Curator of Education and Outreach Fellow at the Power Plant, and I'm pleased to welcome you all on this Saturday afternoon for a conversation with Hajra Waheed, Jayne Wilkinson, and Nabila Abdel Nabi. As you may know, the Power Plant's fall exhibitions opened to the public with great success last night. These fabulous exhibitions include Anxious Audience by Rashid Johnson, What We Found After You Left by Naeem Mohamed, Blues Claire by Vincent Meeson, and of course, Hold Everything Dear by Hajra Waheed, which is made possible by the generous support of the Michael and Sonia Kerner Charitable Foundation and numerous other supporters. We are also grateful for the support of Le Bureau du Québec à Toronto, who have helped make this program possible. Additionally, the Power Plant is a fortunate recipient of funding from the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. Lastly, we continue to thank BMO for supporting the Power Plant's all-year, all-free admission. After last night's celebrations, we are now excited to launch into our seasonal public programs. In addition to conversations like this one, the Power Plant hosts Sunday Scenes, where speakers from the world of art and other disciplines offer their response to the current exhibitions. On October 3rd, the Power Plant is also hosting its annual Student Night, which is a networking event for emerging professionals and post-secondary students. Later in the season, the Power Plant is pleased to present a lecture performance by Montreal-based poet Kay Kello, in addition to 2 film screenings, a book launch, a conversation with Naeem Mohamed and artist Jarrett Videra, and much more. For more information about our numerous programs, please visit thepowerplant.org. To focus on today's programs, we are thrilled to have Hajra Waheed in conversation with guest curator Nabila Abdel Nabi and Canadian Arts Editor-in-Chief Jayne Wilkinson on the occasion of Waheed's most extensive solo exhibition in Canada at the Power Plant, her participation in the Toronto Biennial's projects, and given Jayne Wilkinson's extensive writing on her work. Today's events are co-presented with the Toronto Biennial of Art and Canadian Art. Please join me in welcoming Ilana Shamoun, Deputy Director and Director of Programs at the Toronto Biennial of Art.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. I'd like to start by thanking the Power Plant and Harbourfront Centre for hosting this event, and thank the Power Plant and Canadian Art for inviting us to partner on it. Very happy to be here today. We launched the Biennial this morning. It opened to the public today, and it's on view until December 1st for free in various locations, mainly along the waterfront, but also at partner sites. It's called The Shoreline Dilemma. It was curated by Candace Hopkins and Tyrone Bastian. I hope you'll all take some time to visit it over the next couple of months. We also have an extensive list of programs like the one today at partner venues and also at our 2 main sites at 259 Lakeshore Boulevard East, which is just to the east of us, and Small Arms Inspection Building to the west. So please take a look online. One of those programs, I'll just do a quick plug because it's happening here later today, is called Harbor Symphony, and I wanted to mention it. It's at 7 o'clock tonight. If any of you are sticking around, it's happening on the harbor just outside, and it's a really exciting program that's run by composers Delph Maria Homan and Raven Chacon with Alison Cameron, John Oswald, and Mark Sabat. They've brought this project to Toronto. It originated at St. John's Harbour in Newfoundland, and they've brought it to Toronto for the first time. They've sent out both new and archival scores to tugboats, trawlers, ferries, leisure vessels, and ocean-going freighters berthed in the harbour who will play them on their horns. So please feel free to join if you're around at 7 tonight. Hajra Waheed has 2 works at the Biennial. We're very proud to be presenting them at the Small Arms Inspection Building in Mississauga. They really serve as a key to the group exhibition there. They're right at the entrance as you walk in. They're entitled Strata 1 to 24 and Untitled Map. They are, as I said, at the entrance of the Small Arms Building, which was an old munitions factory that operated from World War II into the early 70s, and they draw us into an intimate engagement with geological materials, with the visual language of surveillance in land, and many layered histories. In conversation with Hajra, there was a clear desire to contextualize her work further, as Jayne has recently done really beautifully in the current issue of Canadian Art, launching today. So this seemed like a wonderful opportunity to connect these conversations, as well as her work, of course, at the Power Plant and the exhibition Hold Everything Dear, curated by Nabila. So I'm now thrilled to briefly introduce Hajra, Nabila, and Jayne. Hajra Waheed lives and works in Montreal. Her multidisciplinary practice ranges from interactive installations to collage, video, sound, and sculpture. Waheed has participated in numerous exhibitions worldwide, including the 57th Venice Biennale in 2017, the 11th Gwangju Biennale in South Korea in 2016, the Ciphers at the Baltic Center for Contemporary Art in Gateshead, UK in 2016, Still Against the Sky at the KW Institute for Contemporary Art in Berlin in 2015, L'Avenir, Looking Forward at La Biennale de Montréal at the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal in 2014. Waheed's works can be found in permanent collections, including MoMA New York, the British Museum, the National Gallery of Canada, the Centre Pompidou, the Berger Collection in Zurich and Hong Kong, the Devi Art Foundation in New Delhi, and the Art Institute of Chicago. She was shortlisted for the 2016 Sobey Art Award and received the 2014 Victor Martin Lynch Staunton Award for Outstanding Achievement as a Canadian mid-career visual artist. Nabila Abdel Nabi is an art historian and curator based in London. She is currently curator of international art at Tate Modern, and previously she was with us here as associate curator at the Power Plant. Prior to that, she served as gallery manager at the Third Line in Dubai. She earned her MA from the Courtauld Institute of Art and a BA from the University of Chicago. Jayne Wilkinson is a Toronto-based writer and curator, and she is currently editor-in-chief at Canadian Art. Previously, she was editor and publisher at Prefix Photo, director at Prefix ICA, and has held positions at the Blackwood Gallery, the Vancouver Art Gallery, and the Emily Carr University of Art and Design. She contributes art writing and criticism to a variety of print, online, and peer-reviewed publications. She holds a BA in art history from the University of Guelph, as well as an MA in art history and critical theory from the University of British Columbia. And just a quick housekeeping note, as the program nears its conclusion, we'll have the opportunity for a Q&A, so please write down any questions or keep them in mind. And we're also excited to invite everyone to the Slip to celebrate the launch of Canadian Art's Fall 2019 issue. So without further ado, welcome.
Is this working? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nabila Abdel Nabi, and it's really great to be back in Toronto and a little surreal as well. I just wanted to say a couple of quick thank yous before we get started. First of all, thank you to Jayne. Thanks for being here with us today. And congratulations on a great issue of Canadian Art and a really, really beautiful article on Hajra's work. Thanks, of course, to the team at the Power Plant. You've all been so incredible to work with on realizing this exhibition. It's been wonderful to work with you again. And finally, thanks to you, Hajra, for trusting me to accompany you on this journey. It has been a journey, an incredibly thought-provoking and poetic one. So thank you and congratulations on a beautiful exhibition. We're going to speak, as Alana mentioned, for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then open up for questions from all of you. But I think first, both of you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say some thanks at the beginning as well before we sort of get into it. Just to say sort of on behalf of Canadian Art, thank you to our partners at the Toronto Biennial and the Power Plant. It's really been incredible to be sort of able to bring this together and use this as an opportunity to launch our fall issue. So I'll just give that a bit of a shout out again. The theme is Undoing Painting. There's actually 2 covers by Sunny Asu, so this is one, the second is at the back as well. And yeah, as Alana mentioned, please feel free to join us afterwards from 3 to 4 at the Slip for a reception and a kind of casual conversation. I also, wanted to thank Nabila and Hajra for the opportunity to think through Hajra's work together and an opportunity to think about what it means to be looking at art and thinking about art in a kind of more slow and considered way than sometimes we have an opportunity to. It's been really great working with both of you. And also, before we start, just to thank all of the amazing staff that I get to work with at Canadian Art. I'm very grateful. This is my first issue as editor-in-chief, and it's truly a huge collective group effort to make a magazine and publish online every day and do all of the events and programming that we do. So thanks, Nick, for your help with organizing this event, and all of the editorial staff and everyone that we get to work with. I think that those are my thank yous. Hajra, do you want to say anything before we start?
Well, I'm flanked by two incredible women here, so I have to start by thanking them and how supported and I have felt in this journey and far beyond the last couple of years. And I've known these two for quite a while, so it's really nice to be able to be sitting here today with them. And to Gaetan Verna for giving me this opportunity to show with this incredible team. The power plant is a really special team, from its installation team to just everybody on the ground working together. Lauren Barnes, Amin is here today. There's so many here that made this exhibition possible. My partner, Devlin, who's also here today, not tonight. I feel like it's last night, but it's, I have slept. Not very much, but I have. The Toronto Biennial for just being so wonderful to work with. It's been really special to be able to bring so much work, so much new work to this city, and to be able to show in this country that I'm actually I am a part of, and you'll see the complexity of that as we unfold it. But it's been a real honor to be able to do that right now. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so I think I'd like to begin with the title of the exhibition, which references a text by John Berger, and whose writings also underline much of your work in the exhibition, Hajra, right? So I guess, could you tell us a little bit about what writing has meant for you and your work in this show?
So the title is actually a direct reference to John Berger's text collection of essays called Hold Everything Dear, Dispatches on Survival and Resistance. I believe it was written in 2007. Like John Berger's works, or works, nonfiction works by Arundhati Roy, Rebecca Solnit, there's a really beautiful mastery of language that has a certain sense of poetics that I have always gravitated towards when it comes to considering the condition of our current state of the world. And they do it so beautifully. And so I've always had an affinity to writing that really delivers a mastery of expression that I think John Berger does really well, and others. Writing's been a really integral part of my practice. Although I have a very strong visual language, much of it is often written. So, for example, this particular exhibition took 2 years to make, from conception to completion, and the latter part of a good year was actually writing. It was writing a series of notes, and I consider them working notes for an exhibition. They're now embedded in a narration that you kind of come along or come to towards the end of the exhibition, and they're embedded in a video work. And that writing was quite integral in kind of understanding the visual language that you'll see as you explore the exhibition. So writing's always taken a really strong form, whether it's through annotations that are embedded within the visual work itself, and or just the way, for example, Sea Change unfolds I kind of consider it as a lifelong project and a visual novel. So yeah, writing has been quite an integral part, but also reading. So reading and writing and listening has the synergy of course, all three of them. But yeah.
I'm going to jump in with a bit of an unplanned question, but since sort of on the topic of sea change and writing, can you talk a little bit more, can you say a little bit to sort of open about the method of working in chapters and working through various projects sort of through iterations over time? Because I think that that's also certainly connected to writing in the book form.
Yeah. So Sea Change is is this sort of lifelong project. It started in 2010, actually, and it unfolds over a course of 9 chapters. Each chapter is dedicated to one character, and they're all on different explorations or quests. But I think we're in 2019, so 9 years later, I've still haven't gotten through chapter 1 or character 1, but and hundreds of works have sort of accumulated. But over the course of time and these works, you kind of get a sense of what Sea Change and this character is really doing, both having an existential sort of quest in terms of understanding himself and in relation to nature and his natural explorations, but also the ways in which he sort of considers himself. And so it's I kind of see Sea Change as like holding ground to so many works. So it almost feels like all of my works will one day sort of be, if anybody wants to take it on, reformulated into this sort of working novel. Yeah.
So I'd like to just come back to this idea of writing really quick. And you talked about the visual language in the exhibition. And a lot of the writing around this exhibition references this idea of the spiral. But actually, as you're going through the show, you don't ever encounter the spiral as a formal or visual element. So I'd really like to hear from you a little bit about how the spiral has worked as a sort of conceit or a framework for this exhibition. And I know that there's a text, maybe you want to read out from the video installation, text that undergirds the show.
Sure. Yeah, so I made this decision really right up front. The form, the spiral, kind of exists within art history, within literature. It's one of the first manifestations we've seen of a visual form in cave paintings. It is a very sort of primal intonation of how we exist in the world, and it exists in both as a natural form and otherwise. But I wanted to be able to complicate that form and also readdress it. I'm happy to share and read from it. It takes about 5 minutes to read, so I don't know if you want me to read through all of it. You'll hear it, but I'll start, and if I feel like I want to keep going, I will. This is what they asked me to do. It probably will continue, but here it is, and these are these working notes. The spiral is much more than just a form. Its motion can be centrifugal and centripetal. It can denote both growth and decay, ascent and descent, evolution and involution, accumulation and dissolution. It expands and contracts, increases and decreases, reveals, even as it hides, all the while offering back anew whatever it receives. It is not amnesia nor the status quo. It is not sapless nor atrophied. It does not settle nor occupy. It does not want you to believe it is immutable, inevitable, invulnerable, unchangeable. It is not naively cynical, where perfection is a measure by which all else falls short. It is a study, and not an art. Indeed, it is not perfect. It is a dance of moving closer to the beloved, the possibility of approaching the essence, a way to understand and process time and space. A rooted blade of grass circling around itself, it's the form of smoke entering the air, the reverberations of a drop of rain on another body of water, the form of embryos and the cylindrical helixes of our umbilical cords that tether mother to child, of blooming date palms and the curvature of seashells. It's the waveforms found in heart cells, rhythmically contracting to produce each beat, and the shape that nerve cells take before firing into the brain at the slightest onset of fear. The form DNA strands resume, that whirlpools inhabit, that fingerprints fortify. The elliptical discs of spiral galaxies, the approach of a hawk to its prey, the approach of an insect to a source of light. By maintaining the same shape through each successive turn, the least amount of energy is used. I'm reading it all now. It reverberates ad infinitum, informs our perspectives, and grants us insight into what is visible and invisible. It is the practice of return. It is never redundant. It is the act of remembering, the act of making oneself whole again. At its eye, it is a compass that allows us to stand center in the middle of a storm. It reminds us that just as everything comes together, everything falls apart again. It is standing in full knowledge of this and remaining undefeated against despair. It is a way of seeing, the gift of wild possibilities and untold stories. It is the belief that what we do matters. It is made from the power and will of individuals and unarmed people, from the extraordinary achievement of ordinary people and ordinary daily actions, of tending to, listening to, watching over, and protecting. It is survival as revival, resistance as reclamation, resilience as transformation. It represents the awareness of the self and the expansion of this awareness outwards. It is about community, collaboration, attaching and being attached, about keeping an open heart in the face of a broken one. Change is rarely a straightforward line.
I love in the exhibition, and for those of you who haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to do so after the talk, but I love how you work through a lot of different kinds of material. You work through a lot of different ideas and sort of different histories, and the video with the poem that you just read out in the voiceover is sort of the last thing you experience in the exhibition. And to me, a lot of the ways that you're describing what a spiral is and does really articulates a lot of the other issues in the show. One of the things that I think in hearing that in installation that stayed with me was the line that a spiral is a study, not an art, and thinking about what it means to study, what studying is, and what that sort of means. So if we're thinking sort of about the spiral as not necessarily as a metaphor, but as a kind of method or way of working and way of bringing together the works in the show, it's something that returns, that sort of circles back on itself, but that is never the same. It's not we talked about this, it's not a cycle, it's not like a season, it's sort of something that signifies a bit differently. And I think with your work, there are so many studies. You know, you title works with studies like the Study for a Fallen Object, the Drone Studies series. So, and in this exhibition, there's studies for a starry night. So I was, thinking a lot about what that means and what it means when art is able to, when a work of art is able to tell us something or teach us something that we can study from it. and also that it's a practice or a sort of process for you of studying in order to come to the work. So even as you're describing like the sort of process of writing, and I think that's a really sort of interesting thing for people to know, because it might not be, entirely obvious when you're in the exhibition space or when you see the work, how much that sort of process and way of thinking and sort of poetry of thinking goes into the sort of gets condensed into the work.
Yeah, and I think of study as something that is really mutable, that's changeable. I think of it as also the study of what exists already, so the study of histories, but that they are changeable. So, official histories versus those that are and constructed histories, and so I think that my work, I try to keep my work embedded in a space that is not there to tell a linear sort of narrative, but one that is open-ended and able to insert itself and reinsert itself.
Which actually gets me thinking about a particular project. So I saw your work, the ARD, Project Study for a Portrait, earlier this year in Dubai at the Jameel Foundation in the context of an exhibition titled Crude, which thought about sort of the transformative effects of oil on the region in terms of geopolitical upheaval, but also, empire building, modernization. And I think some of the work that we see in the exhibition here, speaking about how you sort of come back to certain works and unfold and continuously sort of expand upon, some of the works that we see here sort of stem from this project, and I was hoping you could speak a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I'm sure many of you probably have already known about this biographical detail because it comes up very often, but I was raised on the largest transnational oil corporation in the world, Saudi Aramco, which is actually currently in the news once again, just as of Saturday. Its largest oil processing facility was attacked, which took out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production overnight, and almost over 5% of the United States collection of that oil instantaneously. It's been sort of spoken about in the news as a heart attack at the core of the oil, global oil market. And it comes at a pretty interesting moment, especially considering the millions of youth that have took to the streets around the world yesterday, and that continue to on a global march against time, and also against these forces that are, and by forces I mean by forces in which conflict and oil extraction have played a huge role in the violence that has ensued and continues to worldwide. The ARD project, I was invited by the Jameel family, who started the Jameel Art Center, a Saudi family, to dig through the archives of Saudi Aramco's archives. So both historical archives, but also company archives. And what I found in looking at the history of Aramco is between 1945 and the late 1960s, there was a series of worker strikes that took place in the country and were linked up to larger social movements that were happening in the region, anti-imperial movements. And I was really interested in both, but also interested in the histories of that particular struggle. And so that's what brought me to the archive in the first place. What I found out was that in 1946, the ARD was established. The ARD is called, it was known as the Arabian Research Division, and it was a unit, a research and intelligence gathering unit that was embedded into the company, which was a really special way that of sort of embedding sort of an intelligence unit. And it was there to first and foremost, it was started by a man named George Rents, who had worked for the Office of War Information in Cairo during World War II, and he was invited to start this organization, which he did, the Near East Studies Department of the Office of War Information. So between 1945 and 1947, the CIA was still being formed, and the Near East Department had asked him to do this. George Rents is considered, he called himself an Arabist. He was a scholar, an American scholar who was fluent in Arabic, and he wanted to make sure this unit ran like an organization. And so it was really quite responsible for many things, not only monitoring and quelling social movements, but also a lot of surveying and surveillance of the area. So a lot of that first documentation and the majority of surveillance documentation of the region is both of Aramco and the Persian Gulf area, but also the Suez Canal during the crisis. And his team was really responsible for doing a number of things, writing policy notes, fact sheets, producing films, creating a magazine that was free and accessible around the globe that still functions today, Aramco World Magazine, setting the territorial limits of Saudi Arabia and beyond, and really writing from the ground up much of the histories of not only Saudi Arabia but beyond, and sort of. I was really interested in how the ARD was able to produce these histories and maintain them as primary materials, source material that we still use today. So George Rents, for example, wrote in the Encyclopedia of Islam and over 56 entries into it. So he wrote for example, a 3,000-word statement on the Arabian Peninsula. This is considered primary material today. These materials were written back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and they have a very they have a really strong hold on how we understand those particular constructions. So that body of work is over the last 2 years, besides Hold Everything Dear, the ARD project is a body of work that has also unfolded, continues to.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on the ARD because I think this is such an interesting project, and it's a history that is certainly not well known or well sort of publicized. And one of the things that I think is really incredible about working with an archive for an artist is that you can kind of you can sort of pull out some of the ideas and sort of poke at some of the areas that you think are the most compelling. And one of them with the ARD, of course, is the production of knowledge and the production of a whole sort of like, as you've said, like history and discourse of a region, including like mapping and how the region is territorially defined. And so I think it's interesting how as an artist, you're sort of displaying the work doesn't necessarily have all of that information contained or published with it, but that it's asking people, it's sort of like asking your audience to do the work with you, to come with you. And I think that's a really, that speaks to your way of working into other bodies of work, is that the works can seem quite minimal, like there's a certain economy of material and economy of means, but they're so rich in the stories and the research and the kind of narratives that are in them. And so I think the ARD it's interesting how this has come in your practice, because it really gets at both of those things.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about George Lorenz was that he was also an academic, and he was very closely linked to U.S. institutions, universities, and so much of that writing was fed back into, he would write primary material and then feed it back into universities, and then they would turn it into scholarship. And I mean, much of the historical, so just linking it back to what's on show, is that there's a lot of photographic elements in the exhibition. They're taken from historical and archival material, and they are linked. You'll see many moments where there's, for example, plumes of smoke. Those are actual plumes of smoke from oil refineries that are currently under fire. Abqaiq, Ras Tanura, Dahran, other moments where either there were explosions or fires ensued or malfunctions. And I've been making this work for years, but here we are at this moment where it's happening or happening again, but now it's in the public eye, in the public view. And so I kind of tend to play with that because at once you see an image and you might not think it's relevant because maybe it's the material that's being used or the page it's on, but it always kind of channels back into that same sort of feed of, there's a certain, what I would like to convey is a certain sense of timelessness around some of that material. This living at the centerfold of a particular kind of geopolitical context that Saudi Aramco is, and knowing it for as long as I have, it feeds in and out of, and that's, yeah. So.
And yeah, so Jayne, like you mentioned, obviously, and Hajra, you know, you've worked with archival, historical or archival material before on multiple occasions in ways that involve like cutting and restructuring and basically pulling apart at the seams these materials that have been used to form sort of hegemonic narratives, like you were saying. And I just, you know, you allow for these sort of historical omissions or occlusions to seep out in those spaces that you create. But I'm wondering how that happens in the studio. So how that really unfolds when you're in the studio. How do you deal with this material? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, you only have so much time inside of an archive, and you want to get the most out of it. So, and a lot of times you don't have the right lighting, and you don't have the right environment, and you can't take anything home, and you can't take a pencil in with you. Sometimes you can't. You got to wear gloves, and sometimes you don't get access. And so the archive itself, the moment of the archive is a very brief moment. And so what you collect from that moment is quite important. And so I will go back oftentimes, whatever archives I'm using. And after taking however many images that I can take, and I will put them back into Photoshop and build an archive from that, a physical one. So I'll take all of the images and then turn them into actual photographs, put them on photo paper, and put a stack in on a studio table, and just spend a lot of time sifting through it. And I tend to push paper around. That's how I describe. People say, "What do you do?" And I say, I push a lot of paper around. I spend a lot of time sort of looking at and sifting through material before I'm able to really cut into it, because I think that so months will pass before I can actually cut into anything, really. There's also a certain sense of violence to it, so you have to be like, and it's coupled with a really amazing feeling of liberation, and that doesn't happen instantaneously. So I spend a lot of time looking at what I need to cut away at in order to get to a new narrative, and in order to build a new construction of it. So that's sort of what I do. But I also spend a lot of time just having stacks of paper that I've found or been gifted to me. So, I mean, I know this is going to come up, but there's a sun drawing, for example, that's just paper that's been folded out, and in the exhibition, it's just sunlight. But that stack of paper is essentially was sitting completely folded into one stack. And I think it was in a drawer I have many drawers, these like file folders, for years. And maybe it came out and then it got put back in. And then several months ago, I opened it back out and it was this sun drawing. And then I framed it. But paper plays a really large role in my practice. It's the backbone of my practice, works on paper. But also, went to the Art Institute of Chicago and got my BFA degree there between 1998 and 2002. And I'd gotten in on a full scholarship, but I was broke. And I sat in on my first day of class at the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was a photo class, because that's what I wanted to study. And I looked at the course syllabus, and it read $1,200 at the bottom of it is what I needed to get through the course. And I immediately just got up and left because I couldn't afford it. And I walked into a drawing class across the hall, and I spent the rest of my time in the drawing and painting department cutting up photographs and looking at photo books and doing everything but that. But I also spent, drawing also required material, and I couldn't afford paint art store supplies. Those are also really expensive. So I would go to the south and west sides of the city to stationery shops across these parts of the city and ask them if they could show me any paper that had been, any paper that they had left out in their storefronts that had been sunned, because they wouldn't sell them or couldn't sell them, but they also didn't know what to do with them, and they wouldn't throw them out. So I would just collect them, and for free, and that's how I spent the first 4 years of art school, and then I just kept working on this material. And so the sun drawing kind of represents this like ode to a material, but also mostly to also an understanding of process of time and the energy of the sun. Because as much as I work around issues related to, fossil fuels and the politics of land and extraction and mining of this land, I also believe in the power of this energy and the importance of that energy and the ways in which we can shift ourselves outside of one set of energies into another. So, for example, fossil fuels are composed of millions of years of oceanic vegetation, and we burn that in a span of minutes. And don't realize the impact of time and the scale of that impact, and but also that we are all composed of this energy, and that sun drawing really just kind of glows and reminds us for a moment to take a moment to remember that, or at least it does for me, because I don't feel like I made that. I feel like I'm sort of presenting what has been made, but so.
Actually, Jayne, that reminds me of this really, really beautiful line in the article about Hajra's work, where you describe her work as using the natural elements as cosmic markers of time, and the way that it places us outside of sort of human-centric notion of time. And that work, I think, it just resonates so beautifully with that work. I was hoping.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's one of the things with the sun drawing, is that it makes us think about timescales beyond our own, and timescales that we actually really have a very difficult time comprehending. So you sort of begin to think about, okay, well, what is the length of time of my lifetime versus a generation versus like the span of human life in the context of the earth and the sun. And I think in a lot of your work, you actually sort of subtly subtly and not so subtly bring elements in that are ways of understanding time that require us to be slower and think beyond our sort of capacity as humans. So I was also, when I was writing that, it's referring to the Vow series, the paintings that you showed in the Venice Biennale exhibition in 2017. And there you have this series of works of paintings on tin that are sort of installed in kind of a line and showing different scenes, different like landscapes, different scenes at night. I think there's one or two with people in them, but mostly the end and sort of starry skies and like a shooting star. So you have some like fire burning, some like big sort of like clouds, but all very sort of small and quite intimate works. So you have this really, I think, interesting relationship between intimacy and the cosmic, or sort of the universal. And so when I was kind of writing that section and thinking about that, I was really sort of in awe of how much the work can condense so much meaning into a small thing. And because the sort of materiality of the works are relatively small, they require like a sort of one-on-one view. They're not kind of immersive, but they sort of point to things outside of themselves that are immersive or sort of full of kind of like, yeah, a wonder and an awe, but not in a, like in a very serious way. Like it takes very seriously the natural world and without, I think without kind of sort of like over aestheticizing it, without over kind of representing it.
And over-explaining,
Yeah.
you know, and there's no sort of didacticism about the work, which has been one of the most challenging but also rewarding aspects of working with you in your work and also curatorially speaking, because it's in those spaces that you create this generosity for people to come in and make their own associations. You know, like you were saying, you used the word constellations, Jayne,
Right.
as the title of the article, and I thought that was such like a sort of perfect way, actually, to describe your work, Hajra, because it's so much about, you know, bringing together and intertwining moments or material and allowing for that space, allowing for viewers to come in and make their own associations, to insert themselves also in those narratives, recognizing the fluidity and the non-fixity of the material that you're working with.
Can I just talk a little bit about that title for a second? Because I think for me, one of the challenges in writing and thinking about your work is that there's so much information and research and thinking that kind of gets condensed into it, but it's challenging to think about what that means for a wider audience, because I think you ask people to have their own kind of interpretive, the work has its own interpretive potential, and you ask your audience to do some of that work with you in the spaces in between. So in thinking about the title came from reading and researching some of Rebecca Solnit's work through our conversations about hope in the dark, but actually through a text a collection of essays from several years ago, Storming the Gates of Paradise. In one of the essays, she talks about the night sky and the ways that the constellations have been used for wayfinding and have kind of traditionally been markers of our space on Earth. So I was kind of thinking about, but she has this whole passage. I'll read actually part of this because the title is definitely owed to her. In this essay, she says, "Stars are made of flaming gases, but constellations are made of stories. These works ask us what stories and whose stories have been inscribed on our experiences and what has been erased, overlooked, or forgotten. A constellation is made by drawing imaginary lines between the stars to make a picture of something other than stars. A metaphor draws analogies between disparate things, finding a common ground for them that makes each look different." So I realize it might be like a little bit of, I'm maybe like stretching or pushing this kind of metaphorical association, but I do think that, and you see this in the exhibition here at the Power Plant, I do think that with your work there's enough space built in the sort of in-between to think about them like this, like that the work kind of becomes sort of points of meaning or points of reference, but that as viewers we have to kind of navigate our way through them, and that sort of process can look different for each person. Anyway, thank you for that. Was the story behind the title.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And actually, you mentioned those paintings, the Vow
Vow.
series, and I actually wanted to come to painting because there is quite a bit of painting in this show. However, we choose to define that. But it's interesting because some of the paintings on tin, the ones that you were describing from the Venice Biennial, there's a few here that I think there's a sort of continuity there, but that also was a sort of, I think, important moment in your practice, right? Because it signaled a sort of return to painting after a few years, a number of years. And I mean, so much of your work is interested in also like the mechanics of looking with the ocular experience, with image making. And so I wanted to ask what this sort of return to painting has meant for you.
I mean, I studied painting, and then I studied it. So then, what happens when you study it? Well, in my case, I spent 14 years undoing myself from that study, the institutionalization of that study. And so I didn't paint. I did everything but paint. And I think that was really important, because I think I just really wanted to make paintings in a particular kind of way. And that way is actually, the feel of it is quite representational in certain ways. But there's a certain sense of scenography to that painting style as well. So the next time after 14 years had passed, and in between, I always said that if I was going to paint again, I would paint the sea. I was just going to start with paint. It was just this thing I wanted to do. And so I did. I painted a set of works called Our Naufrage in 2014, and then another, so yeah, I tend painting for me is.
Wait, can I just take you back to something?
Yeah. Okay. See, I'm gonna. They're really good at trying to keep me focused. It's I'm very unfocused human.
No, not
generally.
at all. But just the relationship between painting and film for you, or like sort of describing the paintings, or the sort of description of scenography and what that has meant, because in some senses the way that you paint is sort of traditional, like that there's painting on a surface, paint applied to a surface, but it's the way that you're doing it is very specific and unusual.
I consider painting very much connected to time. I find it very much a time-based process, and I feel like the manner in which I construct my paintings they've, recently, at Venice there were 38 paintings on tin. They're all part of one work. But as you kind of follow through, you kind of get led through each painting. One painting leads to another, and in between each painting is this cosmos that's a sort of marker of time. And it does unravel itself kind of like a scenography, but you're asked to sort of imagine what happens in between it. But yes, there is a certain sense of seriality to also my painting. So there's two sets of 9 paintings in the exhibition. One's called Hajra, which in Urdu means House of Dreams, and it's a series of paintings you'll probably come across that they're cloudscapes, but they kind of are formed in a grid formation, so it almost looks like you're looking, and I kind of imagined them as these projections of what it meant about the importance of dreaming while in prison, the idea, or just as a concept of being able to still hold on to something, even while in a state of imprisonment, to hold on to that like little moment of openness that is dreaming while completely contained. Same thing with the landscapes. They unfold on a shelf, and they kind of unravel themselves in this very serial, scenographic manner.
That work in particular I think is interesting. Is they're also very symmetrical. So you read each individually, but then you have to read them in relationship to each other. And I think with thinking about including your work in an issue called Undoing Painting, which is sort of an issue about painting that's sort of not about painting. We were really trying to think about the ways that artists use and respond to the kind of historical legacy of painting as a kind of art historical form. And I think with the way that you've been incorporating painting in the last few years, you're really kind of using it as a way to get to something else, like using it as a way to talk about something else. And it's not necessarily even of the image or the content, like the content of the work necessarily. I think it's also about what those images kind of signify within the rest of your practice. So, like for example, the wall and the pipeline painting, is also, is set just off from the ladders and the walls, so you can think about what your position is looking down, the sort of like view from above, or the sort of oblique aerial view.
Just a different vantage point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape paintings are, it's called Landscape 1 through 9, and there are a series of paintings that are on a low-lying shelf, and they're purposely sort of placed there as a means so you kind of look into and through a certain kind of vantage point. And you're looking at it from a distance, and you're looking in over a valley. That valley contains something that is dividing itself. You're not quite sure if it's a certain set of lines of control or demarcations. You're not sure if it's a wall or perhaps a pipeline, and yet it looks utterly ridiculous as it sort of exists within this landscape, because the landscape itself simultaneously is swallowing it. It looks so absurd almost, this human construction of it does. And so I was kind of interested in the ways in which these constructions of walls, I mean, you'll see walls and ladders and roads and ladders and ways of circumventing or navigating or overcoming exist in little small ways in the exhibition. And I was just by shifting perspective. And I think that's what I was trying to do there.
I noticed that we have time. We have about 5 minutes. Okay, so maybe 5 more minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. So one more question. I wanted to talk about the letters and the palm drawings, because they really resonate within your practice in the way that they so deftly navigate between the intimate, this really intimate or personal encounter or exchange that speaks to an embeddedness in a larger kind of collective or even radical action. But in that case, that is also very much rooted in the land. So when we talk about landscape, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about those works.
Sure. The palm drawings, there's a set, I think, I don't know how many, I've lost count of everything now. 8? Yes, see, 8. There, some of John Berger's works, he's kind of considers, I've always been intrigued by some of like his dispatches or notations. Sometimes he has these like strong, like really beautiful like hand drawings. There's this book called From A to X that was also like years ago when I first read it. It was like quite seminal. It was just these love letters that were passed between two people, one person in prison, the other one out on the outside in a particular social struggle. And I was kind of fascinated how these letters slipped into, they conveyed a really complex struggle, like social struggle that was unfolding, but they would always also invariably always slip into these beautiful love letters between these two people in separation and in exile from one another, without any sight lines that they would return, like come back together. And I found that really quite fascinating, that text and how it unraveled itself, but also how Berger kind of spoke to so many issues within that work, but it was this beautiful piece of fiction writing. Anyways, these are just a series of letters from letters. My partner is deeply involved with movements in different parts of the world struggling to defend their lands from multinational agribusiness corporations. And much of just watching, being outsider, insider, in terms of just on a daily level and watching those struggles unfold, and seeing the ways that these intimate struggles have such larger global implications has been something that I continue to wrap my head around in terms of trying to better understand how change happens and how social movements are long, and change is a long, winding road. I mean, Rebecca Solnit sort of speaks about this, that we live, it's really easy to think about the world coming to an end. We all live and we all die. It's very easy for us to actually wrap our heads around that concept. What's harder to wrap our heads around is the idea of a world that without any end, and the sidelong paths of change that are possible. And I think that's something that I am trying to understand and hold onto in this time, when we shouldn't assume that the struggles we are up against will happen as struggles, that they won't be instantaneous. So they're scribbled notes, but one of the little notes are actually are these 12 points about corporate tactics that were actually developed by a collective of community activists that were struggling against oil palm plantations in West and Central Africa. So there's like little moments where these notes really, live in both, fact and fiction, but also are quite closely interrelated with like a lot of personal experiences. Yeah.
I think for me too, reading the palm works, reading those letters, I realized how you are required to make connections, or like where the connections are in your various bodies of work. Like the letters are sort of detailing, as I recall, the murder of one of the plantation workers by the company, but over in a way that's very that's sort of unspecific enough that as a reader in an art gallery, you can feel a real sense of empathy and of understanding, even when you are so disconnected from the experience of it. And so then thinking about, okay, this is an individual, this is a single life, but what it signifies, and then seeing like images of the sort of like smoke, the plumes of oil. There's like one that looks like an atomic explosion, or it could be like the sun, but there's enough room for interpretation that it's not prescriptive. So I think that balance is actually very important in your work, that it's not just about a kind of aesthetic it's not just about an aesthetic, but it's actually like able to point to the other things. So you might not need to know that it's a sun or an explosion, but when you have this other kind of context around it, you really understand it differently. And I think the letters from the palm plantation really help point to that.
Okay, I'm aware that we want to leave some time for questions, so I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you both so much for this, and we're going to have about 10 minutes for questions, but also we're going to hang out afterwards, so we can always have conversations following that. So yeah, I think there's going to be a couple of mics going around, 2 mics that are going to be roving. So if you have questions, please just put up your hands.
Is this working? Okay. As Alana mentioned, Hajra, your work is installed at the entrance of the Small Arms Factory, and the space is such that as a viewer, you can go in many possible different directions. I'm curious if there are any particular conversations between your work and other artists' work in that space that you find especially stimulating or intriguing.
Do you want to?
Sure.
I can't answer to this right now because I have to say I've been. I haven't seen the show. I've seen it installed. but power plants kept me busy, so I really look forward to heading over there as soon as I can. But I know Jayne
But I can answer that question.
So Jayne's going to.
I mean, I can't answer for you, but one of the things that I thought was interesting in the install, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet, to get to the Small Arms building, but the relationship with the work of New Mineral Collective and Hajra's Untitled map work, and thinking about the sort of subsurface strata, not only in terms of the geologic strata, but what it means for us to be constantly mining and digging at the earth and sort of sampling it. And then the Untitled map, which is sort of installed and shaped like a heartbeat or like a seismograph reading, is a piece of information that's I believe still like classified.
Well, now it's
maybe you should
taken
describe
from
it.
a classified map of the largest offshore oil field on the planet, 296 miles from where I lived, and it kind of reads like a heartbeat of sorts, but it's a map that is sort of a topology of something that lives deep below the surface of the sea, but it is very, very much present, right? So it has a life of its own. It's not flat. It's and it really is, I mean, more than ever, really a pulse line of sorts that I think we're becoming increasingly aware of, all of us, whether we associate with that or not, or have any relation to it or not. It will reveal itself as being quite an important node. And so, but the map's been elongated and manipulated and folded. I tend to fold quite a bit. Folds happen in my work quite a bit, and that was part of the process of shifting our perceptions around maps too. What's revealed and what's not, and the ways in which you can build counter maps of sorts just by folding it, and also displacing it. So,
yeah, and I think for a lot of or certainly from what I've seen, for a lot of the artists in the Biennial, I think the extractive industries and the sort of oil and gas, I guess specifically, but also extraction have been a kind of underlying current. So with the New Mineral Collective work, they registered for prospecting licenses in Ontario and were able to use, I guess, the software that you would look at to make claims, and then the works that are installed that you see just sort of behind Hajra's are sort of like blown up examples of like core samples, but using slag from around Ontario. So they're really thinking about like what comes out of the earth, what are the like processes of like mining and extracting material in order to make value. And I think the map is also of the offshore oil field is also doing a similar kind of thing. It's an abstraction, but it's signifying a space that is open and sort of available for capitalist use. And I think that both of those projects speak really nicely to each other.
Thank you all. Could you tell us a little bit about your foray into ceramics?
My foray into ceramics. Well, after a couple years ago, it took me a couple years before I actually could even start working on it. But a couple years ago, I really, really desperately felt this need. It's the same intuitive need you have when you go to the beach and the first thing you want to do is bury your feet in the sand. It's like, and I desperately wanted to do that with my hands, and I just wanted to bury it into the earth, and I just needed to use it. And I have a very dear friend who's an incredible ceramicist who worked really closely with making, helping me. She assisted me throughout. I was 7 months pregnant when I was invited to Venice, and Christine Massel asked me if I wanted to make new art. And I was like, yes, of course, without any knowledge of what that really was going to look like. And so, And 6 months, after my son was born, Venice happened. And so I think I just really wanted to return to a certain... ceramics is an incredibly intuitive process, and I needed that. I think my works on paper are very controlled, and I know it really well as a space and a place, and I wanted to break that knowledge. It's also the same thing I did. I took 2018, I tried to push 2018 off. Years ago, I had set myself up so that in 2018 I would have no shows. I would say no to all shows so that I could just break any cycles of making, and I could return to a studio practice that I know so well, that's a daily practice, and that I could just really just make new work for a while. And I was able to stave off exhibitions for about 9 months. And that's how the ARD project and Hold Everything Dear sort of came about, with just having that time and space outside of exhibition contexts and walls and prefabricated spaces and curatorial efforts, all of which are amazing, but sometimes lead you in ways that in ways that I wanted to be completely unled, and I wanted to just be able to lead myself again, at least in new research processes. And so ceramics was this very intuitive return, I think, to just wanting to break a certain kind of cycle. And so that's why I came to it.
Maybe I'll just take this opportunity to ask you about the performance Hold Everything Dear, because that also seemed like it was, when you first performed it and did it, it felt like that was also a bit of a break in your practice from what had been, a very exhibition-based practice into live performance, but still with some of the same concerns around writing and certainly activism. And that was the first time I think you used the John Berger sort of as a really overt reference in the work.
Oh, the title of it,
yeah.
I studied performance in art school, but I never felt compelled. And so it was, but then I was invited to ACAL, which is Asia Contemporary Art Week in New York. And Lisa Ahmedi invited me and asked me to do a lecture/performance, which was a really nice instigation to what I ended up doing. I ended up just doing a performance, which was, some people got up on a podium and would give a talk, and I find that really not as intuitive as probably just doing making work. And so it's a really simple work. It's 10 minutes. Ended up showing it at March meetings at the Sharjah Art Foundation a year later. And essentially, it's just me standing sitting in front of a light box with a live feed camera over my hands and an object, and it's being projected behind me. And it's there's a reading, actually, a narration, a sound narration that's read accompanied with it, and it's a letter my sister had written me 3 years, or had written me maybe a couple years earlier in November of 2015. And the reading sort of unfolds while you're reading it, while this object sort of mutates and unfolds, and kind of so that's what it is. But what is it about? So.
Well, I was asking just because of this idea of sort of a break in your practice, but it seems like even despite the medium sort of shifting, there's a very consistent kind of through line around maybe abstraction and the kind of an interesting relationship with abstraction, where there's a through line that's very specific, the relationship with your sister, this letter that's about sort of exile and a really quite specific narrative of exile and loss, but that's told in such a way that again, like that you feel a lot of empathy for the narrator and that you understand this kind of story, but that the image that goes along with it is, yeah, this dark form that's sort of shifting behind you. That's, yeah. Not really a question, but.
Okay, we have to now wrap it up. But again, another thank you so much to both of you and to everyone for coming.
Thank you,
Thanks
Nabila.
so much for coming, you guys. This
Yes,
is an
and thank you for
amazing
joining us.
turnout. Full house. Thank you.